Hey there folks! I posted on Patreon a while back about what people would like to see as an art tutorial from me, and it looks like everybody chose coloring, which makes sense. I kind of feel like my coloring is probably the strongest part of my art. So this is that video. I'm gonna go over kind of my process for coloring, and who knows, maybe it'll help you guys figure out some new techniques for your own art. So the program that I usually use is Clip Studio Paint. I just really like how it works. It's just a really nice program. And I have this file set up. I've already posted this. It's the hot date picture. I posted it up on Instagram and Twitter and all that already. It's already done. I'm going to show you guys how I did the colors for that. So I've already done all the inking stuff, and I put down flat colors. All my flat colors are on like one layer. I just like having it in one layer because it saves space. It's easy to find what colors are where. And I can't really get into like color choices and color theory and stuff. I just kind of wanted her to have like a retro sort of look, so I went with this kind of Y2K-ish color scheme, I guess is how I would describe it, where it's like teal and pink and it's kind of gaudy and ugly, but it also looks kind of cute. But I would need to go into like a whole spiel that even I don't really fully understand. Like a lot of this I do by ear. Speaking of color theory, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to show where the light source is coming from, and that helps you plan out like where the shadows are going to fall, what they're going to look like. So for this one, I want the light to basically be coming from the UFO. So she's going to be very backlit. She's going to have not a lot of light on the front of her, but I still want some of it. I do tend to fudge it a little bit sometimes based on what looks good. And I mean, that's the nice thing about art. You can fudge things. You can just like make things up. And if it looks good, who cares? So the light source is going to be kind of a very, very light green. So what you want to do for shadows is you usually want to do a lower value of the complementary color of your light. I've got this kind of reddish purple here, and it's the complementary color of kind of a bluish green. What I decided to do here is, because it's going to be mostly shadow, I just paint filled the whole thing, and now I'm carving away the light source with my eraser, and I'm just using like the default soft eraser in Clip Studio Paint. It's pretty generic, but it works pretty well. I use a lot of the default brushes, honestly, because they're probably the most similar to like normal tools, like the kind of stuff you would normally use in like traditional art, and they work for me. Yeah, I am gonna be carving out where I want the light to fall, keeping in mind that the light is coming from the UFO in the background, and it's kind of above and behind her, so she's gonna have this light falling on top of her, kind of creating sort of a halo sort of look around her. It's not gonna look like this. Right now she just looks red, but we're gonna get into that. It's gonna involve layer styles, overlays, multiply. I'm gonna fast forward through this and we will see how it looks. So one thing I do want to mention is that when you are doing your lighting and shadows and stuff, you want to keep in mind how far away the light source is from your subject. If your light source is close to your subject, the lines between the lit part of your subject and the shadow are going to be very like sharp and crisp, very well defined shadows. But if you're far away, they're going to get lighter and lighter. So you can kind of see it's what I am working on with the dress there. The parts that are closer to the light source they have a very defined shadow, and I'm kind of making a more fuzzy sort of edge. The further down I go, the further away the light source is. And I think that this adds a little bit of realism. I think that it makes it look a little more dimensional. Alright, and now that I've gotten all of that shadow worked out, what I'm doing here is duplicating the layers, and then I'm going to turn the one on the bottom to soft light and the one on the top to multiply, and just knock down the opacity on the multiply, like way down. I'm fiddling with it a little bit. What this does is the soft light kind of adds some of the color from your shadow that you've already painted on, and the multiply adds more value. So I always find that using the soft light adds this really nice bit of extra color to your shadows. You don't want to use multiply all by itself. That's just gonna make things muddy. It's gonna not look great. But it's good if you want to basically push your values a bit more and make your shadows a little bit darker. So I'm pretty satisfied with the way it looks here, so I'm going to move on to the next part. So when you're painting human skin, you can kind of tell that there's like blood, you know, under human skin. What that is called is a subsurface scattering. You usually see it in like your cheeks, your joints, things like that. And it adds a nice little bit of realism to your character's skin. That's why you see people do that weird thing where they like paint this big old red blotch on like the top of an anime girl's boobs or something and then add a little bit of shine in it. That's an attempt at subsurface scattering. I kind of hate that. It looks terrible. When I do it, I try to do it in more of a subtle way. So you can see I'm trying to be very careful with how much I put on, and I'm trying to blend it out a little bit. It's a very small thing. It's very subtle. It's not going to be like a big, obvious thing. At least not for my particular style. But I like being a little more subtle with it. So yeah, don't be afraid to like knock down the opacity on these things. And where it's going to be most obvious is basically where the light meets the shadow. So that's why the edges are always kind of a little bit redder than the rest. And I think that looks closer to kind of the real shade that your skin would actually be if you were like outside on a sunny day. Alright, so now we are going to get into lighting, and what I didn't mention before is that I'm using masks part of the reason why I keep all of my base colors on one layer is that I can easily like right click it and click select layer, and it will select everything in that layer. So it'll select all the colors that I have, and then I make a new layer and I click the little button. It's like a square with a little circle in it, and that creates a mask based on your selection. So basically what'll happen is when I paint on this character, the paint will only show up where that base color is. So it's only going to show up on her. So I don't even need to worry about all the other crap. So the light source is going to be kind of this light green, and sometimes I'll like test it out just a little bit. Since it's all on a separate layer, you can just like Control Z or erase it or something if it doesn't look the way you want it to look. And then I just start painting the light in, you know, the light areas. So you can immediately kind of start to see how this goes, how it looks. The hair looks more vibrant now because there's some light added to it. The face has a little bit more vibrancy to it. And I think later on I'm going to change this a little bit, but for right now I'm just kind of getting the color down. That's all I'm really aiming for at this point. And one important thing to keep in mind is that the farther away you are from the original light source, the more subtle it's going to be. It's never going to be completely gone, but you know, if it's far away, it's probably going to be a little more understated. And it's also important to keep in mind the type of material you are working on. So we're working on human skin and fabric. So human skin is kind of reflective. It depends on what kind of fabric. This is kind of like a regular dress fabric, like cotton or something. So it's not going to be super reflective. It'll be a little bit reflective, but not much. So I'm having it be about as reflective as human skin, just to make things kind of easier. But if she was wearing like a chrome fabric, that would be very, very reflective. That's going to be really, really shiny. The lighting is going to be really sharp, but that doesn't really apply in this case. And you can kind of see the little bobs on her antenna. They are a little more reflective, so I made the light really sharp on those. The hair is going to be more reflective than the skin, so I'm making that pretty sharp and obvious. Yeah, it's a very important way to convey texture, because the more reflective something is, you're going to know that it's like smooth and metallic-y and very reflective. So you're gonna, you don't want the hair to be looking plastic unless you're going for that sort of thing. I wasn't really satisfied with how drastic the lighting was, so I decided to go back and kind of add a little bit more to her face. Not really to the rest of her, though. And then sometimes, just for good measure, I add one more layer and add a little gradient of that light color, so it just kind of falls over the top part. And you want to keep that pretty subtle too. You don't really I'm playing with the layer styles here, you can see. But you don't want it to like overpower the lighting you've already done. And it kind of balances out the rest of her, which is very like this very soft pink and warm color, and it's got this green to kind of contrast with it. I made a new layer and hidden the extra layers except for the shadows, because now I'm going to be painting in the reflections of the character herself. You may notice that sometimes parts of your body reflect other things around you, like the color of your clothes or the color of your jewelry or something might reflect about in your skin. And again, this is a very subtle thing, but I think that it's really important. It adds a lot. So I'm just going in and putting a few reflections for things. This is mostly going to be on like her hair and a bit on the cloth, just because things are so close together. And yeah, you're going to want to kind of refer to the color of the object that is closest to the object that you're painting on. So on her leggings, there's gonna reflect a little bit of like gray, because the bottom of her dress is kind of grayish. And the fabric kind of reflects on itself sometimes, so there's a little bit of a halo basically. I'm not sure what it's called exactly, but there is like an actual term for this, an actual artistic term for this. I don't know, I guess like reflections or something, just reflections. This happens to pretty much all objects, even objects that are really not very reflective at all. They're always going to take on at least a little bit of the color of the things that are around them. All right, and you thought that we were done with lighting. No, you're never done with lighting. I really like doing lighting, so I'm always very detailed with it, probably more detailed than I need to be. So I've turned the primary light back on, and now what I'm doing is the rim lighting. And again, you're gonna want to keep a lot of these on like separate layers so that you can easily adjust them or erase them if you need to. Remember to use clipping masks. Those are like a godsend. The clipping masks are super great. What I'm doing here is I'm adding rim lighting, which is a reflection of the environment. It's not the same as like the cast reflections from the clothes or the skin. It's a reflection of the environment itself, and it's usually a little bit more homogeneous and a little bit sharper. It's like a contrast of the main light source. You're gonna want to figure out what the environment around the character looks like. So since the sharp yellow-green is kind of far away from this part of the character, I'm going to assume that the rest of the environment is kind of a more bluish green. So the rim light that I am using is kind of a bluish green rim light. And when you add that, you add a little bit of a little bit more dimension. Again, dimension. It's all about dimension. And it just makes the way that your character looks feel a little more grounded, a little more realistic. And again, yeah, you're going to want to keep in mind how reflective things are. So if you take into account like the main light source, reflections from the objects that are around you, reflections from the environment that makes up the rim light, you can imagine how if I was coloring something that was like chrome or super duper reflective, how crazy that would look. That's why chrome has all those colors in it, if you've ever looked at like a picture of a chrome ball or something, because it's just that reflective. For characters, that's usually not going to be a thing unless you're making like a robot character or something, but this character is just a human, so she is in kind of an unusual circumstance. It is a tractor beam, so the lighting is a little bit different, but it's not going to be enough that she's like glowing like chrome or something. Never be afraid to like cut back. Like sometimes you don't need to really make it super duper obvious that this is what you're doing. If you want to experiment with this stuff, you can just make a layer and you can just try whatever and mess with the opacity, mess with the layer style, turn it to like overlay or multiply or add or whatever. It's really just observing the way that things look in real life and kind of trying to replicate how those things look, and observing the way other artists do it too. I'm actually not sure. I was going to say what artists I follow whose coloring styles have really influenced me. I don't know now that I think about it. All the artists that I know were a big influence on me were like cartoonists. Like Pokemon was like the original inspiration for a lot of my art style, and also the art of Osamu Tezuka. You can probably see that. A lot of like the shoujo artists, probably them actually. I probably get a lot of my coloring ideas from them. If you have an artist that you like, you might want to study the way that they do this stuff. You might want to see exactly how they make this character pop, you know. Analyze the way that they do something. That's always very helpful. So, and do studies. Studies are important. Do still lifes. I know they're boring, but you should do them. They are a big help later on when you're making something from imagination. And then I just add a little extra highlight to the eyeball, because the eyeball is also very reflective, so the highlights are gonna add a little bit of reflectiveness to objects like that. I usually only do this with the eyeball, but it depends. If there's like another super reflective thing like a jewel or something, I'll add more highlights. For like super duper reflective highlights, I just use like plain white, just complete white, F000 or whatever the heck's text decimal coded. And now it is time to add a little bit more by coloring the line art. So hopefully if you have already started doing digital art, you know to keep your inks on a separate layer by themselves, because the inks are super duper important. You want to make sure that they're like protected. So if you turn on the lock transparency icon on your inks, what that is going to do is that you will be able to color your inks and only your inks. It's just going to make it so that you can color only the things that are on that layer. My particular art style is very graphic, so I honestly prefer black lines most of the time. But what I like to do is a little bit of like lightening the lines, basically, depending on if they're like inside of the character. I guess it's hard to describe, but you know, like the folds, and yeah, you can see where the lines overlap with the colors. This is also pretty subtle. You don't need to do it, depending on how graphic and how unrealistic you want things to be. But what I like to do is very realistic colors but extremely unrealistic line art. I have these very cartoony characters, so it's kind of a blend of both of those things, and adding a little bit of a line color kind of helps sell the colors. So don't be afraid to experiment with that. If you ever mess it up, you can basically just get a big marker tool and just turn it to black and scribble all over your line art layer again and just erase all of the colors. It's very easy to reverse it if you don't like how it looks. So yeah, just try that out. Some people color all of the line art of their artwork. I've never been able to make that look good. I just don't think it looks good with my art. So it's just a few things, and it's usually pretty subtle. Like, most of the time you can't even really tell, honestly. I can tell, but I don't think other people can. Yeah, I like it. It adds a little bit more dimensionality. Yeah, that's just me. It might be different for you based on like your art style and what you're aiming for. If you're aiming for like super photorealistic, you're not going to want to have lines at all, because, you know, outlines don't exist in real life. That would be like straight up painting, no line art at all. And I do sometimes do pieces that don't have any line art. They are a lot harder and they take me a lot longer. So, and I'm not really sure that they ever look as good as something with line art does, just with my style. So yeah. And now we are repeating all of those steps, the same steps with this little alien dude. Okay, and now it's time to do the background. So what I am planning on doing is making it kind of just like a big circle. It's gonna have stars behind it, so it looks like she's being lifted through the sky. I'm adding a little bit of transition here because I don't want it to be just one flat blackish blue circle. The night sky is never going to be completely black. It probably looks like that when you go outside during the nighttime, but it doesn't look good in art, like at all. It never looks good. So I always go for like a very, very dark blue, very dark purple. Since her colors are very warm, there's a lot of like yellows and yellow greens and reds, very cool dark dot in the background. It's going to make her stand out. We've also got the tractor beam that I ended up pulling back a little bit, so it's still there. You can still tell what it is, but she is still going to be the main focal point. So you're going to see her kind of pop thanks to these that contrasting background. So I put a bunch of stars in the background, and what I like to do to make these look more starry is I like to duplicate the layer that they are on, and then to go to the layer at the bottom and go to filters and apply a Gaussian blur. So what that's going to do is blur the stars, which adds a nice little glow. And what I also ended up doing was going back to the top stars and messing with their colors a little bit, just so that they're not all pure white. So I made some of them a little bit greener. This is also pretty subtle. I guess that's what I'm trying to make to drive home, that a lot of this is subtlety. You want to know where you want to be subtle and where you want to be really big and obvious. And we got that tractor beam. Tractor beam is basically just a green triangle, but I locked the transparency on that layer and I added radiance. So the top part is like a bluish green gradient and the bottom part is like a lighter gradient. And now I'm adding some like little special effects like bubbles, sort of sell that it's a tractor beam. Okay, so I like this. I think that it needs a little something else. If the warmth of her colors was knocked back a little bit and more blended into the scene more naturally, so I duplicated the tractor beam and I brought it all the way up to a layer over her and sort of punched down the opacity real far. You can see, so she still has those warm colors that pop up, but they are a little more green tinted now. What that is going to do is sort of unify her with the scene. The problem is that her leg extends outside of the tractor beam. I made a new clipping mask that includes both her and the tractor beam, so that would add like this nice extra green, and then I used the blending tool to kind of blend out the tractor beam color on her leg. You basically just need to like hide the seam. Yeah, now she has this nice green over her. And then I had already drawn these word bubbles, and I am adding the text. Clip Studio Paint has a terrible text tool, and I hate it. I hate Clip Studio Paint's text tool, but it's the only option I have. But the artwork itself is all done. The coloring is done, and that is how I do my colors. That is how it works for pretty much anything that I do. Yeah, don't be afraid to go back and fix things, mess with things, change opacities and change layer styles and stuff. It's fun. Art should be fun. You should be experimenting. I hope that it was helpful. I'd love to know if it helped any. I'd love to see any pictures you make using this. So feel free to like send that to me. I would love to see it. So I'm going to fast forward through the rest of this and show you the finished piece and how it looks. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.